Well, in the first round of missile attacks on Israel from Iran, British aircraft were involved, as I understand it, in helping to shoot down the missiles. And we need to be ready to do that. But there is more that we could be doing. I think the Royal Navy ought to be out there and not leave this all to the Americans. We should be defending British and Western shipping in the Red Sea.
In a moment, we'll be joined by the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. But first, let's speak to Sir Michael Fallon, a former Conservative Defence Secretary. Good evening.
Good evening, Carol.
Good to have you with us. As things stand, with Israel essentially locked in battle on several different fronts, how grave do you think the situation is 1 year on from those terrible attacks of October the 7th a year ago?
Oh, it's very grave. And I think it's, if anything, it's going to get worse. Israel will go on defending itself. Those hostages are still in Gaza. The rockets continue to fall on northern Israel. And I think Israel has decided that enough is enough. It has to protect its people. And it will go after Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis until its people can live safely within their own borders. And I think the West needs to reflect on that and whether we're doing enough. We're doing enough to tackle the causes of this instability in the region.
Well, when you say that, we heard the Prime Minister today calling on all sides to pull back from the brink. It doesn't seem as though Israel, let alone anyone else, is necessarily listening to what the UK has to say or even to what the US has to say.
Well, Israel is being rocketed. Its residents are being bombed. Its hostages are still in Gaza. Hezbollah and Hamas are continuing their attacks on Israel. And, in the end, we've got to look at the cause of all this. And the cause of all this, of course, lies further afield, as is in Iran's continuing denial of Israel's right to exist as a country and its sponsorship of these terrorist groups, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, that have been attacking Israelis and have been attacking Western interests. They've been attacking British shipping as well in the Red Sea. Until we deal with the cause of this, which is that Israel has a right to live within its own borders, that is currently being denied by Iran and its proxy groups, then this is going to go on for a long time.
And the Prime Minister, the Defence Secretary have made it clear that the UK stands with Israel in this. Indeed, the British military actually supported the latest response to those Iranian attacks on Israel. From what you're saying, are you suggesting that we should support Israel directly attacking Iran, even though that would amount to an even further escalation of the war?
Well, in the first round of missile attacks on Israel from Iran, British aircraft were involved, as I understand it, in helping to shoot down the missiles. And we need to be ready to do that. But there is more that we could be doing. I think the Royal Navy ought to be out there and not leave this all to the Americans. We should be defending British and Western shipping in the Red Sea. And I think across the West, we've got to toughen up the sanctions on Iran. Iran Airways are still flying into Heathrow. They'll be doing that until next year. Iran is still getting its oil out in defiance of the sanctions. And it is the revenue that it earns from those oil sales, from the illegal retankering of the oil. It is that revenue that is fueling these terrorist groups and is supplying missiles and drones to them, and indeed supplying missiles and drones to the Russians into the war against Ukraine. So we have to deal with these things, where the causes lie, and we have to do that as a united West. And I think Britain could be playing a more stronger role alongside the United States.
Sir Michael Fallon, former Conservative Defence Secretary, really good to speak to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, let's speak now to Ehud Barak, who was Prime Minister of Israel between 1999 and 2001. Good evening to you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, good to speak to you. How would you describe the mood in Israel today, 1 year on from those attacks, and with Israel still engaged in battles on several different fronts?
So on the one hand, it's a deep pain still heavy frustration for the worst day in our history just a year ago. And deep feeling of the need to revenge it to somehow. But at the same time, there is a higher satisfaction for the results in the last 3 weeks, starting with the pager story and then with the elimination of the Hamas leadership before then, the killing of Hania in a guest house of the IGRC over there inside Tehran. So basically, there is a feeling that Israel resumed its self-confidence. We have the more trust of the public in our intelligence, our defense forces, and a better respect to Israel in the region and a better deterrence, as I've mentioned.
So you think that the Israeli
far from being over.
So you think that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was right to go on the offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon with those attacks, the pager attacks, the walkie-talkie attacks, the strikes we're now seeing, and indeed troops on the ground inside Lebanon?
I think that it had been justified 8 months ago and probably needed 8 months ago. In fact, what the only complaint can be against him that he didn't do it many months ago and let our people, there are refugees inside Israel, some 80,000 people living in the north, didn't see their homes and will come to see them destroyed after 11 months. So for sure, it's justifiable and a good step. It was done successfully, which is very important. Israel is after a major failure on October 7th, original. So it's good direction, very much too late.
And we know that Israel has vowed to retaliate against the Iranian missile attack of last week. The US President Joe Biden and others have urged Benjamin Netanyahu not to directly attack Iranian nuclear sites. Do you think that he would be justified in doing that, or doesn't that just risk a further, wider escalation?
It's a delicate situation. I'm confident that this issue is debated, discussed between us and the United States, and even within the Israeli leading kind of circles. The justification is there. Iran attacked us in an unprecedented way. I think no nation had suffered such attack in the recent generation, and no sovereign would leave it kind of responding. And Iran is going toward nuclear weapon. It's now already a threshold nuclear power. That's what makes the decision very sensitive. American presidents in the last decade or so used repeatedly to say that America will never, ever let Iran to turn into nuclear power. This coming to a test now because there is an opportunity, legitimacy to attack Iran. I think it will be considered. Of course, there are other sides. I don't want to go into all the details.
Do you think Israel should go ahead and do that, despite all the risks involved?
You know, I would not publicly give a recommendation. I see that there is enough justification. There is a good reason to Americans to wonder whether it's not the right time to do it. But having said that, because they are already a nuclear threshold state, it might in some way accelerate their running toward a nuclear kind of arsenal that should be taken into account. And there is a need anyhow to take certain steps against Iran turning nuclear. Not an easy situation. I'm not sure it's a good idea to discuss it in front of cameras.
We know that today has been a day when, above all, many people, particularly in Israel, have been remembering those terrorist attacks of October the 7th a year ago. But what about the deaths of so many Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere since then? Well over 42,000 people now killed in Gaza, according to the Hamas Health Ministry. Do you think that the scale of civilian deaths, it really risks undermining international support for Israel? Hasn't the response been too indiscriminate?
I think basically we have to look at the causal chain that led to it. I think the gentleman before me, Michael, he made it very clear, very accurate. We demanded, asked, proposed to Palestinians to leave the Gaza northern part and move to the southern part en masse for many days before we start the attack. So 800,000 of them moved. 300,000 remained. They remained not because they like to be a target to attacks. They remained because they had a handgun to their temples and templates, and basically the Hamas coerced them into staying and serving as its human shield. Now, Israel had a compelling imperative following the barbarian attack on October 7 to make sure Hamas cannot reign over the Gaza Strip again. It cannot threaten Israel from there, and that needs action. It cannot be done just by word.
But so many civilians have died, including in areas that were supposed to be safe zones, including in refugee camps, in hospitals.
Let me tell you, I don't believe that any Israeli, not myself, not other Israelis in the mainstream, would ever be happy from loss of life of innocent government. Probably there are certain individuals here and there in the society who are happy. I don't believe that 99% of Israelis are happy with this. But having said that, we have to bear in mind the overall situation. The Hamas deliberately put their command posts and a storing of missiles, rockets, and weapons underneath schools and hospitals and other installations. We did not destroy any hospital, not killing in the hospitals, but there were places, and we told the people, leave these places. Whoever knows that Hamas is operating from his building has to leave it, because we have compelling imperative to attack this source of terrible violence against our own citizens.
Let me just ask you finally, if I may. This conflict is only ultimately going to be resolved by negotiation. Doesn't that have to start with Israel accepting a long-term goal of a two-state solution in order to begin negotiations, in order to try and get a ceasefire, in order to try and get the remaining hostages home?
You know, a few people made more efforts when they were power in Israel in order to try to reach this situation of peaceful relationship. And once and again, we failed in achieving a goodwill and seriousness about it from the other side. I cannot tell you that should not remain the objective. The long-term objective, probably the only long-term objective, is to have a two-state solution. But it's not the right time to talk to Israelis about it. Israelis are not capable to see, as long as Hamas is still reigning over Gaza, Hamas can still making any kind of attacks. First of all, this should put behind us. I think that there was a way to start the diplomatic side, once again, many months ago, the second or the third month, which would already have initiated or tried to achieve much more successful hostage exchange. We could try to join the Americans in their proposals to have a ceasefire in the south, try to settle down the issues in the north earlier than a year after the war started.
Okay.
I cannot say that we could not do it better. We could run it with much more clear strategic objective that was absent from the picture on the Israeli side. But the responsibility for this continuous tragedy is clearly upon Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran, not upon Israel.
Ehud Barak, really good to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining us.